Today's video is an interesting one. Today I'm covering a video called Legend Commentaries, Character Design is My Passion. Let's go through all the degrees before we get on to the video. Degree 0 is an artist named Lavender Town. She made a video called Making Your OC Not Suck, where she gives character making tips. Degree 1 is the Efromentator, who I'll be calling Ephrom throughout this video. You've probably heard of him before if you've watched some of my other videos, since he's a pal of mine. Ephrom covered Lavender Town's video, arguing the claims made within it, and generally criticizing the video. Degree 2 is Pokesonic legend and Sebastian Michaelis, the anime character? Yeah, so this is, I suppose, a co-op covering Ephrom's video on Lavender Town, though the co-op guest is a fictional character, so I guess it's not really a co-op, assuming all the points Sebastian makes were written by Pokey, since the guy who is voice acting Sebastian is only credited for the voice and not the arguments. And finally, Degree 3 is the video you are currently watching. Before we actually start looking at this not-so-great video, I already have a problem. This video is 25 minutes, right? Guess how long it takes for them to actually start covering the video? Guess. If you guessed 7 minutes and 40 seconds, you would be right. That is over a quarter of this 25-minute video. Is that almost 8 minutes spent on giving important context? Well, yes, some of it is, but only about 2 minutes of it. The rest is this weird flashback thing, a very long intro skit, and then another intro. Intro skits and videos are perfectly fine. They add creativity to commentary videos, but that doesn't mean you should spend almost a quarter of your video on it. That is excessive. I'm sure you guys already assumed, but I will be cutting out the entire intro. Let's begin.
Before I continue, I should note that I am not an artist, nor am I an OC maker. I'm just basing my critiques off of common sense and what I understand about concepts like story structure, as well as what an audience member would typically pick up on.
Alright, let's play a little game of keep this in mind for later, because the statement ultimately isn't the most accurate descriptor for how Ephrom argues in this commentary. And while I'm not going to sit here and say non-artists or people who don't create OCs can't discuss topics such as character design, it doesn't exactly bode well for him to admit out of the gate that he isn't the most knowledgeable on the subject matter.
That's not what Ephrom said, though. He simply said that he was not a character designer or OC maker. He even said that he does, in fact, understand some basic things about character design.
Now, theoretically speaking, he could do his own research on the topic to have a better understanding going in.
What? Do you want him to go make some OCs before covering Lavender Town? He already knows about things like story structure and what an audience member would typically pick up on. He literally said that in the clip you played. Also, can we talk about how hard it is to understand Sebastian? His voice is almost whispery compared to Pokey, and it's hard to understand what he's saying.
But as we'll see in a short while, the likelihood of him having done that is rather questionable, to put it simply.
Now, the more astute among you might notice that this thumbnail includes warnings that your OC may be both too boring and too much. Too much of what? I'm not entirely sure, but that's another topic. However, the concept of an OC that's too much isn't actually really mentioned at any point in the video. It's all advice for how to not make your character boring, but not on how to stop yourself from creating too much. The closest we get is a warning that if you put too many scars on a character, it will cause said scars to take over the character's story, and possibly cause people to constantly say hello to my little friend anytime they come across that character. Okay, I made up the second one.
If they're covered in scars, that's going to take over their story.
Lavender Town jump scare.
Were you just not paying attention? He said, Lavender Town said this thing, and then proceeded to show Lavender Town saying this thing. That's not a jump scare.
Okay, but in all seriousness, I'm gonna stick a pin on the clip used because what I have to say is gonna be more relevant later on. Yes, I know, I also asked you a different thing Ephrom brings up in mind for later in the last interjection, but both these things are gonna lead into some of my biggest problems with this commentary. That being said, I do actually have something to say about what Ephrom says here. For one, we haven't even started the original video, so it's a little funky to, claim something about it preemptively with no real context or substance.
Pokey, he literally played the clip of Lavender Town saying that too many scars on a character would take over their story. What other context is needed?
You know, what we in the industry call jumping the gun.
And that point is what we in the industry call bad.
Now, it was brought up during scripting that this was the result of Efron doing a non-linear commentary, and thus this was him effectively starting to cover the video. The problem with this line of logic, however, is that after this point, the rest of the video is done through in a standard, more linear fashion.
No, the entire video was done in a non-linear style. He introduces each point individually, plays a clip that shows Lavender Town making the point, and then proceeds to argue against it. A linear style commentary is essentially just letting the video play and interjecting when you want to argue the point made. Like what you do in most of this video and what I'm doing in this video. The way I describe it is that in a linear style commentary, it feels like the commentator is the one interrupting the video to say something about it, while it almost feels like the other way around when doing a non-linear style.
Besides, even with that bit of context, it still came off as jumping the gun due to him making the claim prior to playing any part of the original video.
I mean, yeah, the commentary is non-linear. That's usually how non-linear commentaries go. And he played the clip right after. It's not like he waited or talked about something else before showing the clip. He literally played it right after to show what he was talking about.
A timestamp or two to demonstrate which parts you're covering at any given time would be a simple fix for future reference.
Secondly, what does too much mean? I don't know. Judging by the image of the thumbnail, it could mean too many colors, too many random details, you know, the whole design shebang.
But did Lavender Town explain that in her video? No, that was the point Ephraim was making.
Remember, kids, this is why context is important.
No context was actually given, though. Again, that was the entire point Ephraim was making. The only context you gave was your own assumptions.
I know you're in here, little mousy.
Oh, by the way, I should let you all know, Lavender Town drags out her points way more than she needs to. I put that clip through the timecode feature in Sony Vegas, and it was 1 frame short of 56 seconds for what essentially amounted to give your character hobbies. Well, on the topic of her presentation, she also talks in this fairly whispery voice, and the music occasionally gets loud enough to where it starts to drown her out. It's not a particularly big deal, but it is noticeable.
Oh, great. An interjection purely dedicated to production issues.
The horror of critiquing someone's production quality?
And they're vague as all get out. Yay. Let's start with the point is dragged out for too long thing, because I can definitely understand if you felt Lavender's point was either too wordy or over-explained. The problem, however, is that you don't really explain why you felt her point dragged out for too long beyond a vague notion that 56 seconds was too long for a point that boiled down to give your characters hobbies, which ignores the concept of elaborating on said point to make it better advice for the audience. Hell, I'd possibly even agree if you actually give a reason for why your point felt dragged out, given our video is blatantly unscripted with how often filler words get used.
Ephraim did explain. Him saying that the point just boiled down to give your character hobbies is him saying that she could have easily got the point across in way less time. The irony of you asking Ephraim to drag out his point that says that Lavender Town is dragging out her point is fucking hilarious.
Saying she should have scripted, or at the very least, edited her audio a bit more to help prevent this problem and keep things cohesive would have been a much better point to make here. But you don't make that point, which blows.
You can still drag out points while scripting and cutting up your audio, though. The way you stop yourself from dragging out points is using less words. That's it.
To address your mention of Lavender Town's tone of voice, while audio balancing is certainly an important aspect of production, you don't quite point to any examples of this happening within her video. Only that it happens occasionally, as you put it.
And because Ephraim isn't gonna bring this up, I will. For one, jobs and hobbies aren't the only things that dictate poses, dammit, and I will die on that hill. Personas are a thing, and I wish art YouTubers didn't forget about them. I'm aware that Lavender does bring up personality stuff later in her video.
The next thing you want to think about is what they actually like and dislike. Now, this is an obvious thing, and a lot of people when they first get into drawing their OCs do think about this. In fact, I used to be in the habit of listing like my character's favorite and least favorite everything, like literally down to like their favorite type of tea, their favorite like ice cream flavor, you know, really granular stuff. I actually recommend not going too hard in that direction. You can really get caught up in details that would never be relevant.
Oh, I see how it is. You can play a clip after introducing it, yet Ephraim can't. That makes sense. Why are you allowed to Lavender Town jump scare, but he's not?
However, it's more about likes and preferences rather than, say, whether they'd save a cat that got stuck in a tree or not. Also, this is another instance of her specifying what could be seen as too much of her own video Ephraim. Just thought I'd let you know. Secondly, and I cannot stress this enough, sometimes characters literally exist to fill in the background of the scene and don't need elaborate backgrounds and designs.
I'm pretty damn sure Lavender Town wasn't referring to background characters. Is that not obvious by Lavender Town talking about things such as hobbies, likes and dislikes, and their childhood? Those are not things your background character needs.
So for example, I drew this 21-year-old first. She seems very bland and basic, but then I thought maybe she was sort of goth or emo or like a scene kid when she was 16. And
The best part of this entire video is this baby. It's the only thing keeping me from going insane while watching this video.
maybe when she was 12, she was like a huge science nerd and she loved dinosaurs and had braces. And maybe when she was a little baby, she really used her pacifier a lot and had sort of like downy, fluffy hair, you know, like some babies have. And then when I redrew the 21-year-old with all of these factors in mind, she has straight teeth because of her braces. She has a slightly more exaggerated wing on her eye because she used to be an emo kid. And she's wearing dinosaur earrings because her interest in dinosaurs when she was 12, as well as the little downy bits of hair that kind of fly off of her main hairstyle. That's just latent sort of genetics from when she was a baby and had curly hair.
Okay, the teeth and the curly hair I get, but I don't get the wing and I do not get the earrings. From what I can tell, those are parts of the character's past that they've dropped. Why would that influence their design today as an adult, several years after the fact? We all have former hobbies, things we used to be interested in but no longer are. We also all used to have styles that we've since dropped. And part of losing those interests and dropping those styles is losing the parts that make the fact that you have those hobbies or styles visually recognizable to the people around you. To put it another way, this girl is not going to still keep wearing dinosaur earrings at 21 because she had an interest in dinosaurs at 12. Most kids had interest in dinosaurs, and very few of them wear dinosaur earrings.
You know what? That's actually a very fair argument to make.
I mean, in a way, Ephraim is right.
Wait, are you serious?
Yeah, if someone has dropped interest in back in the day, it wouldn't make it sense for them to show off aspects related to interest in the present day. Though, if I could make some smaller points, straight teeth aren't always an inherent indicator of someone having worn braces.
Lavender Town never said that though. She just said it would make sense for someone who had worn braces in the past to have straight teeth.
And Lavender Town's wording is just vague enough for there to be potential for the character to still have those interests.
If she had an interest in dinosaurs at 21, then her having that interest when she was 12 wouldn't be relevant. We're talking about the character's past, their childhood.
Speaking of, this is such a strangely delivered piece of advice. It would have made sense if, say, you elaborate on this character's past impacted her current interests, hobbies, and personality, but you don't really do that. So all I'm left doing is asking why you even incorporate them into the design to begin with. As an example, you could have incorporated the glasses from the 11-year-old version of the design to kid that past interest in science instead of the dinosaur earrings. That at least would make sense and potentially hint to this character being smart in general instead of indicating a terrible taste in fashion.
First of all, fuck you. Dinosaur earrings are peak. Second of all, I have never ever heard of a single person who wears glasses because they had a past interest in science. People usually wear glasses either for fashion or to fix their eyesight, not because they like science. It would have made more sense for the glasses to be kept because she has bad eyesight, not because she liked science when she was 12.
Now, this would normally be where we just move on to the next part of the video. However, this is where that clip Ephraim played around at the beginning comes back into play. because if you've been particularly eagle-eyed, you'd likely notice by now that it comes from this exact segment of Lavender Town's video.
So as you can see, it makes it really easy to add things to them that make them feel really specific and like that they had a past. Obviously things like scars and injuries and major things like that can also really help build out their story, but you don't want to go too hard on that because if they're covered in scars, that's going to take over their story.
Ah, additional context that Ephraim left out of his video. Lovely.
Literally what context? The point wasn't added upon or changed in any way.
Yo, Alec, what are you hosing there, dude?
This homeless man won't leave, so I'm spraying him with dirty brown water.
Imperfections can be even more subtle things like chipped nail polish and imperfect hairstyles. Now, if you're creating a character who, by their very nature, is extremely meticulous, or perhaps they've been to like boot camp or some other like kind of like private school, things that sort of force you to be as perfect as you can be, even in those cases, you should still probably draw imperfections on your characters just because everybody is human and there's wind and things that you can't control, but
I just wanted my cheese.
It's the last couple of sentences in the clip. Let me repeat them word for word. Now, if you're creating a character who by their very nature is extremely meticulous, or perhaps they've been to like boot camp or some other kind of like private school, things that would force you to be as perfect as you can be, even in those cases you should still probably draw imperfections on your character just because everybody's human and there's wind and things you can't control. So, you're saying that you don't care if a character would have good reason to like visible imperfections, or at least choose to hide whatever imperfections they might have. They should be drawn with them anyways because something waxing lyrical about humans being inherently flawed.
You paraphrasing her point in a different tone doesn't really debunk it. You need to actually make an argument to prove her wrong.
And there is a chance higher than zero of this just being poor wording, but there are plenty of people who make OCs that aren't human. Are demons, vampires, angels, and furries just inherently exempt from your gotta have imperfections rule? You species is quack.
Considering she specified that everyone's human, probably.
Now, Ephraim does have a shot to make a solid argument in response to Lavender's utterly ridiculous statements. What will he say?
Out of curiosity, are you related to a guy named John Favreau? The biggest thing that bothers me about this video is the implication that every single character trait an OC has should be visually represented, when, truth be told, that's not even close to the case. If you're creating an original character and you plan to use them in a story, then things like the dialogue of the story and the setting the story takes place in are equally important and equally valid ways of telling the audience about the character as they're designed. Let's use SpongeBob as an example for the point I'm trying to make. After all, he is one of the, if not the most recognizable children's character of the 21st century. Now tell me, what about his design informs you that he works at the Krusty Krab as a fry cook? Hell, what about his design so much as implies that? Well, the answer is nothing. In fact, there are two things about his design which completely contradict it. Those are the fact that he's yellow, when in color theory, yellow usually means being young and childish, while fast food jobs like the one SpongeBob works at are usually staffed by teenagers, and his red tie, which actually goes too far in the other direction, as ties are typically worn at formal jobs, as opposed to, again, fast food ones.
Well, there was certainly an attempt, all right. Not a good one, but at least you tried, unlike the production nitpicks from earlier.
Ephraim breathes pedantically, season 500, episode 2 billion. I never understand this complaint from people who criticize Ephraim. As long as he's not dragging out these points, or filling his entire video with these points and almost nothing else, I don't see what the issue is if he critiques the production quality.
What? You didn't fail miserably enough for me to quote that one bit from The Simpsons. Plus, saying so would be far too callous for even myself.
Anyways, to address the elephant in the room first, this tangent doesn't really debunk Lavender, at least not in this segment. Now, if you wait until the What They Like segment of her video, then the tangent would have held more of its weight. But as it stands, it's essentially just Ephraim going off on something only tangentially related.
He was talking about the video in general, not this specific point. Yes, the point played before had to do with it, but so did a lot of other parts of the video we've seen so far in Ephraim's video.
I don't apologize for the pun, by the way.
By the way, does Ephraim ever address that segment within his video?
No. After going on another tangent about what he likes in his design, he just skips to the last segment of her video before closing out. Behaving yourself does not mean trying to murder the target of the video.
Alright. Fine.
Thank you.
Why would he have to talk about that segment of Lavender Town's video if he had nothing to say about it? I mean, you've been skipping bits of Ephraim's video left and right, so why can't he skip parts of Lavender Town's video? This hyperbolic joke of wanting to kill Ephraim, would it be a lot more understandable if, you know, he actually did something that was worthy of annoyance?
To continue onwards, your example could certainly use some work. I get what you were going for with bringing up a popular character who doesn't have an aspect of themselves that's immediately obvious, but in execution it falls somewhat flat.
Are you going to explain how it falls flat? No? Fantastic.
The second point about the outfit's alright, if maybe a bit on the curtains are just blue side of things. The first point about yellow usually being associated with being childish, on the other hand, lacks a source or citation, which is kind of a problem considering how complex color theory can be. In fact, childishness isn't even commonly associated with yellow to begin with, being more commonly associated with cheerfulness and enthusiasm, amongst other things.
And cheerfulness and enthusiasm is often associated with youth. And that's all we're covering today, because the last 1.5 minutes of this video is an outro skit. They also make a couple other points, and they're like half decent, so there's not really anything I want to say about them. What are my final thoughts? Well, first of all, the sheer amount of time spent on not covering the video is not great. About 9 minutes in total out of this 25-minute video was spent doing anything but covering the video, and that's really annoying. Also, the points weren't great either. There were a couple okay points, but at that point, just make a one-shot. Any point you made that was actually sound was drowned out by bad points that didn't make sense. There's also, of course, some delicious hypocrisy in this video, which always is great and makes you look really credible in what you're saying. Well, that's all I have to say, so have a great day and goodbye.